How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here, back with another Redzone's roster previews episode. And in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Carolina Panthers. So in this series, I rank the teams from who I think is the worst to who I think is the best. So coming in at the number 22 spot is the Carolina Panthers. So in each episode, I take a look at every single player on the team, and I predict whether they will make the roster and be an impact on the team, be cut, or make the practice squad. So you can see all the previous episodes in this top corner if you have not seen any of the previous ones. And with that being said, we're going to jump right into talking about the Carolina Panthers. Now, like in the previous episodes, I first want to talk about just the coaching, specifically in today's video, Matt Rule, just to get an idea of what the culture is like and do I believe in their head coach for the future. So I like Matt Rule a lot, and honestly, I think similar to why I had the Lions ranked higher than a majority of people, Matt Rule is a reason I have this team higher than many people would probably expect. I just think he's building something here. He has the right mentality, I feel like, to be a good head coach. He's turned every team he's been to, whether you talk about college, whether he was at Temple, at Baylor, and he didn't always do it in the first year. So I think people can't overreact that he maybe didn't do the best last year. I think that he truly will make a difference this year. He at least has a shot with his quarterback now that he's chosen in Sam Darnold. And I think he's starting to get the right guys on this team. He had a chance to coach in the Senior Bowl this year. I truly think that he has the right ability here to build a solid team, and the roster is starting to really come together. But I truly believe in Matt Rule, and that is why they come in ranked so highly, honestly, because I think this roster might not be straight up quite as good. And I do rank these rankings off of roster, but on paper, you could say a team like the Dolphins or maybe even the Giants are better. But I think you combine both a solid roster and a pretty good head coach that's going in the right direction. And also, out of those three teams, because those are three teams that are in similar tiers for me, so you could almost flip them. I honestly, for this season, feel the most confident in their quarterback, which leads me to the quarterback position on this team. Sam Darnold is honestly the other reason, him and Matt Rule, that this team is ahead of other teams like the Dolphins and the Giants. Is Sam Darnold did not work out in New York, but he showed flashes. I mean, he was not great, but he made some spectacular throws that, to me, put in the right situation here with a good surrounding talent core, he can really succeed. And I think given a decent offensive line, given a decent coach, Joe Brady, I think is better even as a coordinator than Adam Gase ever was as a head coach. So I think that this is a great opportunity for Sam Darnold. And it's not like they're forced to keep him forever. If he really doesn't work out, they can flip the script pretty quickly. But I truly think Sam Darnold will take a step up this season and begin to prove why he was picked so high. And I believe that he will take a step up compared to his New York Jets playing days. Now, I'm not still all the way believing him that he'll ever be above like a top 15 quarterback, but I truly think we will see a kind of a mid-career progression here from Sam Darnold. And so that is, I think, why this team is ranked, is I feel actually pretty confident in Sam Darnold. And that's something I wouldn't have said if he was still on the Jets, probably. So I feel like I was shocked, honestly, they decided to flip from Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy was not great, but also not bad. They gave him a 3-year contract and decided to trade him. But to me, that proves something. If the Panthers wanted to go out and get Sam Darnold, they believe in him. And I think that really proves a lot of what Matt Rule's thinking is here. And behind him, they have P.J. Walker, who has played pretty well when given opportunities as a backup overall. So if needed, if something were to happen to Darnold, you have a pretty solid backup who's pretty mobile, who can escape the pocket, has a decent arm. I think he's a solid, if for any team, he could be a really good backup if your starter were to go down. So you feel really good in P.J. Walker being that depth piece as well. and barely making the roster for me, like probably the last roster spot, maybe the second to last roster spot here, is Will Grier. I liked him coming out of West Virginia, but he has not done anything. He hasn't really gotten much opportunities, but with what he's had, hasn't been great. And now that obviously they flipped regime and coaching since he was drafted, he's probably on a smaller leash than he was before. So he could be on the way out, but I feel like some team then would take a chance on him. I feel like he's kind of a gunslinger. He did not play well when he has really been given opportunities, but like I said, he hasn't really gotten many of them. So maybe given a second chance here, I think it's kind of rare now for teams to keep 3 quarterbacks, but this could potentially be a team if so. Otherwise, watch out for Will Grier on the waiver wire. But I have him barely making the roster, so that'll be something to watch out for. So let's jump over to the running back position, starting with Christian McCaffrey. He is, for a reason, the number 1 pick in most fantasy leagues. He is an absolutely solid running back. Now, he has, of course, dealt with injury issues, so it made sense to me to go out and get a guy like Chuba Hubbard and prove and put some capital into that backup position because, let's face it, I think Christian McCaffrey at this point has shown that he can deal with some injuries, especially if you're going to give him the ball the whole time and, line him up at receiver and give him screens. And he's so explosive, but he can't go forever in the way that they want to use him. So I think it was smart to get Chuba Hubbard in the 4th round to be a depth running back behind McCaffrey because we've seen McCaffrey deal with some injuries. But when McCaffrey is healthy, he is without a doubt a top 3 running back, but you could easily put him number 1. It'd probably be between him and Derrick Henry for me personally. So, and they're different players. I mean, if you're going off of all around a football player, Christian McCaffrey is the best running back in the league. It's not even close. If you're going best runner of the football, you could perhaps go with someone else. But Christian McCaffrey offers so much for your team. And I think we just need to see another season of him fully healthy for us to really continue to appreciate him for how much he does for a team that has him. So I truly think that he does have a bounce back season. I think he's going to be really ready to go after his injury and be pretty solid. As I mentioned, they have Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard didn't do as well this past season at Oklahoma State as he did 2 years ago. He was absolutely like a Heisman candidate almost 2 years ago for Oklahoma State. This past season, he kind of fell off a bit. Just didn't seem as explosive, but I think it's a solid kind of counter to what they have. Otherwise, like behind him, they have Rodney Smith, who is a smaller guy. I feel like Chuba can become a power player and at worst case become a goal line back potentially, or just a change of pace, short yardage guy when McCaffrey maybe needs rest. So I think it was a solid choice, especially in the 4th round. Why not? They have Rodney Smith, as I mentioned, played, I think, really solid at Minnesota. Undrafted rookie last season, is able to make some impact, and I think that he's proven enough to make the roster. And I do think that he is explosive when given the opportunity. As I mentioned, at Minnesota, he played well. He's just as good in open space. And so I was talking about when you maybe could use Hubbard as a power player, you could perhaps just use Rodney Smith as your receiving backup to McCaffrey. And then you also have Trenton Cannon. I've never been a huge Trenton Cannon guy, but he can at least be a depth running back for you at this point in his career. But honestly, you could go with Reggie Bonifant as well. That's probably where they compete with that for that last running back spot. So I think that'll be an interesting competition to watch. I feel like Bonifant has played actually pretty well when given opportunities, so you could easily switch those two. Behind him, they recently signed Rod Smith, who's played a little bit of fullback in his career, but I think just a depth piece that they'll cut. And the rest of them are just a lot of other young players, including Mikey Daniel is another kind of has played a little bit of fullback, but just a lot of young players I don't see making the team. But this is an absolutely solid running back. You have perhaps the best running back in the league, and then you have some decent depth behind it. I like Hubbard. Smith is a solid roster player then, not unbelievable behind that, but Between Cannon and Bonifant, you'll get a fourth running back there. So absolutely solid at running back. You're looking awesome. And then receiver is another position that they are just loaded at. Starting with DJ Moore, who broke out onto the scene last year, proved his worth. Quick, can just get open, make some pretty tough catches, and a pretty trustworthy top receiver for a team like this. And then I feel like Robbie Anderson is one of the most underrated players in the league. He can absolutely get open and burn you down the field for sure on the deep routes. Has that Temple connection with Matt Rule. That was a solid free agency pickup. He is definitely one of the most underrated receivers in the league, and is probably one of the best second receivers as well. So that's an absolutely great combo. And going into the draft, I knew they needed a third receiver, and why not get Terrace Marshall Jr. out of LSU, who I had a borderline first-round grade on this year. I think he was an absolute steal where they were able to pick him up in the draft. I think the Panthers, specifically in the later rounds, kind of the middle rounds, I should say, nailed the draft, getting Marshall in the second, and then Brady Christensen in the third, and Chuba Hubbard in the fourth, kind of almost a round later than you could perhaps see them. I think that was absolutely great. I think Terrace Marshall steps in right away in this offense, and if you're looking at rookie wide receivers to make an impact, he has to be up there for sure. I think he's maybe one of the best third receivers for a rookie that you could possibly get. So if you're looking at fantasy and you maybe are looking for somebody outside of DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson in this offense, Terrace Marshall is an absolute steal. He can make some spectacular catches off the jump ball. So I like that a lot. They also have David Moore, who spent some time in Seattle, played relatively well there. I would say overall a relatively good player. He kind of would get in the mix in Seattle when an injury would happen. I feel like that's kind of the same thing here. He's just going to be a depth piece that could be reliable when needed. They also have Brandon Zylstra, kind of a smaller guy, potentially a slot-ish player. Spent the beginning part of his career as a Viking and then moved over here. And I think he's a roster-level player at this point, but I do think he is slipping. Because you also have a competition. I have Shi Smith, who I thought was another absolute steal in this year's draft, making the team just because I think that he has a lot of upside. Versus, Keith Kirkwood also. We just got to talk a little bit about, hopefully he is okay. There was a big hit this past week that basically there was an undrafted rookie named JT Ibe who hit Keith Kirkwood helmet to helmet at practice. And, you can see different perspectives, but the facts were Keith Kirkwood could not move for a long time, had to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I believe he was able to start moving, but, I just hope he is okay. And so I think he's a roster-level player. And honestly, I made kind of part of this. I was looking at this team before that started to happen. And it came down to me before this last spot between Shi Smith and Keith Kirkwood. And the only reason I have Shi Smith making it is because I think the upside. So to me, no matter what, you want to keep Kirkwood around, especially given the youth of Zylstra and Smith. That it's not bad to have a veteran. So I'm using one of my unlimited experience on the practice squad with Keith Kirkwood. But definitely, hopefully he is healthy by the time the season starts. Because worst case scenario, if he were to be cut, another team should look to pick him up. So hopefully he is okay. Otherwise, they have just a bunch of depth pieces. Krishan Hogan, Ishmael Hyman, and Markin Michelle all have a little bit of experience and a little bit from Omar Bayless as well. But just not much there besides Kirkwood to me that I have in that bottom part of the list. So this is a solid receiver room. It's very top-heavy, though. This trio is one of the best in the league, and the duo is absolutely one of the best in the league. But behind that, I think David Moore is solid. But besides that, right now, not unbelievable. So that's what you have there. And this tight end room is also very interesting. I love Tommy Tremble as a blocker and as a player. I thought that was a solid pickup. They picked him in like the third round, which may have been a bit early, but he is a solid player. And it works great because they signed Dan Arnold, who has had kind of limited opportunities, but he's performed pretty well when he was on the Saints, when he was on the Cardinals. Now he finally is given the reins to be a top receiving tight end. Because Ian Thomas, I thought, was going to take a big step up with the retirement of Greg Olsen. He just didn't do it last year. And they lost Chris Manhertz to free agency to the Jaguars. So Dan Arnold can step in and be the number one receiving tight end. And it combos so well with Tommy Tremble. Just such a great blocker at Notre Dame. He was absolutely an unbelievable player. His speed and just the blocking ability was pretty unmatched. I mean, definitely probably pound for pound, one of the best blocking tight ends in this class. Perhaps the best, almost like a fullback-ish type. I think he'll instantly become one of the best blocking tight ends. But he's fast, too. He's not like the Lee Smiths of the world that are slower blockers that maybe can't catch. I think Tommy Tremble could truly be an elite tight end. And if Dan Arnold doesn't work out for long term, I think Tommy Tremble can just be given the reins to this entire tight end room. I think he's an absolute baller. And Ian Thomas, as I mentioned, has kind of been disappointing. So you may be looking to move on from him. I like Steven Sullivan. He's bounced around a little bit already in his young career. So perhaps, I think he's a young player you keep on the practice squad. I also have them barely keeping Colin Thompson, one of my last practice squad spots. And then I have them cutting Giovanni Ricci. So you're looking to basically get something out of this tight end room. He's throwing darts at the board. Not a lot of proven ability here, but Dan Arnold, given the opportunity with a full opportunity to be the starter, maybe could make something happen here. And Tommy Tremble, just watch out for Tommy Tremble. I think that within a year or two, he could just take this from Dan Arnold and be an absolutely elite player. So watch out for Tommy Tremble is what I'm saying for that tight end room. Now let's look at this offensive line. It's actually okay. I mean, you start to look at it. You see a guy like Taylor Moton, you see Matt Paradis, and you see Brady Christensen. You start to think, wow, as long as they don't have absolute scrubs otherwise on this offensive line, that's like a really, really good offensive line. But they kind of have scrubs otherwise on the offensive line. Between Pat Elflein, who has bounced around, just terrible for the Vikings, in my opinion. I mean, he was okay at times, but just not consistent enough. And, he was cut, and then he just kind of was in a rotation for the Jets. And the Panthers go out and sign him in free agency. Why? I don't really know why they rushed to get him. The good news, he can play center and guard if needed. I'd rather have him be a backup, though. I still think he's an NFL-level player, but I don't feel confident starting him. And then John Miller at the other guard spot, just not great there. Another guy that's been around for a little bit that just is a bottom-of-the-barrel starter. I'd rather have him be a backup. But I do love them bringing Brady Christensen. He can start right away. And I think he has some upside, blocked well for Zach Wilson there at BYU. So he was a solid pickup. As I mentioned, Matt Paradis, one of the best centers in the league, I feel like. So he is a solid spot there. That was a great free agency signing a few years ago. He's still really, really good. Taylor Moton is, the wild card because he is so good. They ended up, I think, making a contract work after franchise tagged him. They franchise tagged him this offseason, and you needed to do that. Taylor Moton, absolutely solid player. Really, 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 really good. So he's their strong spot by far on this offensive line because the depth is okay. I like where they have the players because these are all guys that I feel really confident in being depth players, which is great. If you were to just rank the players, they're not, elite backups, but they're solid depth players, which is what you need. I just don't love the way the depth is constructed. Like, some people think Cameron Irving will start right away and let Brady Christensen sit at left tackle, and they should start Cameron Irving. I'm absolutely not a fan of that. To me, give Brady Christensen a shot because Cameron Irving is just not great. I mean, he's bounced around as well. because he just, he's played all over in his career at different spots on the line. So I don't feel confident starting him. I'd rather just put Christensen out there and see what he's got. They also have Greg Little, who hasn't really developed over the past few years. He's a backup left tackle, which then makes it weird, right? Having three backup three total left tackles. He might be able to play left guard, but I also love the drafting of Deonte Brown this year. He's just an absolute monster size-wise on that offensive line. So I love that piece at guard. Dennis Daly is another guy that's a guard tackle spot. I feel like he can easily be the backup right guard, perhaps could even compete with John Miller for the starting spot, but he's just kind of a guard tackle. And then they just don't have a great backup center, really. They don't have, Sam Tecklenburg is way down there for me. I don't think he's a roster level player. So honestly, Pat Elflein is probably their best guard, and that's not saying much, at least right now. But he might have to be the backup center too, because they just don't have much else. Because I'm choosing to keep Trent Scott, who is a right tackle, to be the backup right tackle, and just perhaps can play right guard as well. So you have the versatility here. They just are lacking. I wish they had a better backup center. But overall, I like this starting and depth line a lot. They have the right players. It's just, are they playing them in the right spot? Are they putting the right guys out there? Which is another great, opportunities. They can have a left tackle competition. They could put Christensen, Irving, and Little, see who's the best. They can have a guard competition. They can pick the top two between Elflein, Miller, Brown, and Daly. I mean, I like that. That's good. I wanted to keep at least one practice squad lineman, so I'm keeping David Moore this year out of Grambling State, I believe it was. And he has some upside for sure. And out of the depth pieces they have, I'm choosing to keep him. They ended up getting him as an undrafted rookie. Otherwise, just a little bit of experience, not a whole ton, just cuts on the line. So this is a solid offensive line. I mean, it's just not perfect, but you have some center stones, which are great. You got your left tackle figured out for the next 4 years. You've got your right tackle figured out for a long time. And your center is solid for the moment. It's just the guard spots, the in-between guys, that are kind of lacking, perhaps. But then I love the upside of Deonte Brown, so he could perhaps step in there eventually. So that's what they have on the offensive line. I'd say overall, if you have 3 out of 5 solid starters, that's pretty good. Let's move to the defense, and we're going to start with edge rushers here. Brian Burns is such a good player. He's underrated for sure. He's been elite since being drafted. High upside player, pretty quick on the edge, absolutely dominant. You have they had Julius Peppers here for a long time. I mean, you have a future edge rusher like that here with Brian Burns. I mean, you got to keep him around forever. This dude is absolutely elite, and I think that he is underappreciated by many, and he's so solid here at this position that you feel so confident in it for a long time. Because I don't think a lot of teams have a young pass rusher like Brian Burns. So you appreciate that. But then it's the competition otherwise. They bring in Morgan Fox from the Rams, who's just kind of been a rotational piece, a low-end starter. So he's a startable player, but I don't think he has the most upside, especially at this point in his career. Which is why I think they actually might, after a few games, really let the chains loose on Yetur Gross-Matos, who they took last year in the draft, and I thought was an absolutely great pick. And I truly think this could be a big breakout season for him. And you stick him opposite Yetur Gross-Matos. Now, the other wild card there, though, too, is you kind of have to include here. He'll be mentioned later because he is listed as an outside linebacker in the roster online, but Hassan Reddick, you kind of have to incorporate potentially into the pass rush as well, so he could perhaps be the one getting a lot of reps outside. But I feel like they can run a hybrid scheme here, where they just stick 2 pure linebackers out there, and then they have Hassan Reddick kind of on the edge as well, so you could perhaps consider him in this group as well. Otherwise, I have them keeping Marquise Haynes out of Ole Miss a few years ago, has just kind of been a depth piece here, not really done a whole lot, to be honest, but could potentially get in the rotation. I have them keeping Frank Herron on the practice squads between him and Austin Larkin for a practice squad spot, so you can see who battles it out there. But just having Brian Burns alone is absolutely solid, and you feel extremely confident. And to have a guy like Yetur Gross-Matos with some upside just makes it even better. Now moving to the defensive line, they just chose Derek Brown last year in the draft, and he was okay. I would say he was not, elite, but wasn't a bust like some of the corners were kind of after 1 year. Obviously, you can't label any of these defensive players last year a bust after just 1 year. But I think that Derek Brown will develop this year and prove to be one of the better defensive tackles in the league. So I feel extremely confident in that for sure. I think he can stop the run very, very well. And then you kind of have more of a pass rushing type in DaQuan Jones, who they bring in from the Titans. I thought he was a borderline top 100 free agent this year, so a decent pickup overall. He's a veteran, experience, has some starting ability, so I think you stick him on that defensive line, him and Derek Brown, you could do really well, and you can just go with Jones for a little bit, because then you pick one of the boomer bust players in this draft with Davion Nixon, who, where they got him, I think ended up being a decent value. I mean, it depends. You looked all over, and some people had this dude in like the 5th, 6th round. I think it was a magazine I found this year, had him in like the top 30. It's like, that was definitely not the case, but he was somewhere, I feel like, in the middle, which is where the Panthers got him. High upside, for sure, which is, I guess, what you want to do, especially since Derek Brown was kind of a safe pick last year, considering who was on the board. So I feel like that it was a solid draft choice. They also have Bravion Roy, who they took last year in the draft out of Baylor, a connection there. So that, I think, also between those two, you should have a future second D tackle to go with Derek Brown, is potentially what I would be thinking in this situation. But solid rotation. They picked Phil Hoskins out of Michigan this year in later in the draft, so I think they keep him around on the practice squad. Karan Reed, they just signed like this year in free agency. I just didn't understand it. Him and Jihad Ward are like the two guys that I always come back to on the defensive line. I don't know how they just keep getting cheaper contracts and then barely making the rosters for teams. I think at some point you just need to let it go. I'd rather have any of the other guys above them there, and then I have them cutting Mike Panasiuk. So this is a solid defensive line room overall. Derek Brown, I think, will prove to be a top defensive tackle. Good signing into DaQuan Jones, and you're hoping for Nixon or Roy to really prove that they were worth the draft capital. Now moving to the linebackers, as I mentioned, you kind of have that Hassan Reddick situation. He's more so, I feel like, going to be kind of a hybrid in the scheme, perhaps line up on the edge. But Shaq Thompson has really developed into a solid linebacker overall, I would say. He's not like an elite one, but pretty solid overall, a good amount of speed. And they're still absolutely missing Luke Kuechly. I mean, that tore this team apart when he retired so soon, too. But Shaq Thompson is a solid number one. I feel like just like a little bit better than kind of what Anthony Barr has been for a while. Just kind of he could maybe be a number one linebacker for a team, potentially, and pretty high upside. I think Thompson's better than Barr, but that's about what you're dealing with. They also bring in Denzel Perriman. Solid pickup. I feel like they needed to kind of fill a hole after, the Luke Kuechly retirement last year. So I think that was a solid kind of fill-in piece, because last year they kind of lacked it at the middle linebacker position. So Denzel Perriman is kind of a band-aid at that position, as I talked a little bit about Hassan Reddick. Has kind of been on and off, so, reuniting with his college head coach. I know Reddick came out of Temple, but I think Rule was from Temple at that time, so that would make sense why he came back here, maybe to get the best out of his ability. I mean, he was like a first-round draft choice for the Cardinals. Christian Miller, I liked coming out of Alabama. He just has not done anything here really yet. I don't think he's really been given a whole ton of opportunities, but he's kind of similar to Reddick, where I feel like he'll be more of a pass rusher. He was listed as a linebacker / defensive end, so he'll be in the rotation as well at the pass rush. Then they have Jermaine Carter, who has been around the team for a number of years, a depth piece at this point. I think he was kind of who they had to try to start last year, but I feel like it's better for him to be a depth piece. I have them keeping Clay Johnston as well, who's kind of fought his way onto the roster in this situation. I'm keeping Patty Fisher on the practice squad. I think Patty Fisher is a pretty solid undrafted pickup there, and I feel like they can keep him as a practice squad player to develop. They needed a linebacker, for some depth here. I think it was a solid choice. They also have a few veterans here that they tried to bring in, see if they can get any depth. I don't know how Julian Stanford is still hanging around there, to be honest, at all. Frankie Louvu has been an okay player for the Jets, just kind of a depth piece at best. They recently brought back Jonathan Celestin, who's bounced around a bit. They also just claimed Nate Hall, who was a borderline. I decided to keep Patty Fisher over Nate Hall, but Nate Hall potentially could be a practice squad player. He was released by the Texans recently, and so they actually were waived because then the Panthers chose to claim him. So you could watch out for him as well. So I feel like that's a solid linebacker room. You just kind of have a variety of skill sets, which is great, I guess, to have. So moving on to the corners. First, we'll talk about A.J. Boye. Boye has fallen off the map. It's crazy to think how many teams he's been on since he started to really develop in Houston. So he gets a big contract from Jacksonville. Then he didn't really work out there. He got traded for a mid-round pick to Denver. Didn't really do the best there, so he ends up here. I think it was a solid pickup. I feel like Boye is not a number one corner, which is why you picked a guy like J.C. Horn and you have Dante Jackson. But, you can't just throw this dude under the bus. A.J. Boye is still a high-end number 2 startable corner to me. Really good still, at the physical side, I feel like, for his size. So I think he was a solid pickup. I feel like that was actually an underrated signing this year. So I'll take that any day because you pick a guy like J.C. Horn. I will say I did have Patrick Surtain the second higher than J.C. Horn in this year's draft. I felt like Surtain had the better overall skill set just with the ability to cover. But I would not be surprised to say J.C. Horn's upside is higher. His instincts might be a little better. I feel like his potential is higher. He does have a little bit more to work on, but he's played against some of the top competition in the league. The college league in the SEC in his career there. And my only complaint with J.C. Horn is he's a little grabby still, and I feel like, though, that he can develop that in the NFL. He just was a bit grabby in college, could force some penalties that were kind of unneeded, but he can lock down receivers, and his ball skills are actually very, very good for a corner. Makes sense. His dad was, a really, really good receiver, so that makes a lot of sense. I feel like he can turn into the number 1 corner by the end of the year. And like I said, would I have picked Surtain? Probably, but J.C. Horn is absolutely solid. In 10 years, I think we'll be talking about those two being very, very similar. So, really good choice overall. That was solid. They still have Dante Jackson, I feel like an underrated player. Pure speed. Just a speed demon. I think he is actually, would be about a number 2 level. So to have those 3, that's absolutely great. To have all those guys, really, really solid. I feel like Dante Jackson with that speed and ability to cover, and J.C. Horn with the more physical side, and same with Boye a little bit. The upside for Horn is just absolutely sky's the limit. So just great opportunities here for the Panthers with their corners. They also bring Rashaan Melvin in, who opted out with the Jaguars last season. So he steps back in, solid depth piece to be a 4th corner or 5th corner. I like that. They also have Troy Pride Jr., who came out of Notre Dame last year. I feel like a solid choice. He can develop into something I think potentially be a slot corner, perhaps on this team. But he at least could be a solid depth piece. They also picked Keith Taylor in the 5th round, just to be in the rotation here. So I already have them keeping on the practice squad. Stanley Thomas Oliver III. They took him last year in the draft out of FIU. Didn't do a whole ton as a rookie, and I feel like them picking Keith Taylor, they picked Troy Pride before that. He might be on his, he's lower he's not on his way out. I feel like they should keep him on the practice squad, but he's on his way down to depth chart for sure. Otherwise, between Miles Hartfield and Jalen Julius, I don't think those are NFL level players, but this is an elite corner room. I mean, this is just awesome. This is one of their best rooms overall, and I feel like it's one of the better corner rooms in the entire NFL. That trio, unbelievable. Even if you put like Horn first, Jackson second, Boye third, solid. I think almost any team in the league would be begging for that corner room. So I absolutely think that is solid. At the safety position, I'm pulling, again, I did this with the Giants. I'm only keeping 3 safeties. I like to keep 4. I just couldn't find the value in this situation. Now, interesting enough, I do want to mention this. Jeremy Chin, who was an absolute baller as a rookie last season, came out as a safety in the draft. They have him listed at linebacker on their website, and I just didn't have the ability to do that, in my opinion, because otherwise their safety's not good at all. I mean, you got to have somebody back there, and yes, I do understand that. It's more so they line him up in the box. That's why I kept him at safeties, because he's like a Jamal Adams, where they'll line him up at linebacker, but I'm not going to compare him, to put him at the same spot as like Hassan Reddick and Shaq Thompson. I mean, they'll line him up in the box for sure, because he plays like a linebacker, but I feel like he still should be listed as a safety and lines up back there. But Jeremy Chin, one of their just beautiful draft choices. I mean, that was just unbelievable. I think he was one of the underrated players last year and was a borderline defensive rookie of the year candidate if it wasn't for Chase Young. So absolutely solid. Jeremy Chin is a baller and a really, really good safety there. Justin Burris, I can't really say the same for. That was one of my most confusing signings of last offseason. I really didn't understand it. He's played a corner and then converted to safety, and then they paid him a decent amount. I just don't love that personally at all. So I would rather have him stick Kenny Robinson out there, who they took last year out of West Virginia. Then he played in the XFL actually, and then so right now he's like the only XFL player to ever be drafted. But his zone ability and I feel like his ball hawking ability is actually pretty solid. So if I'm the Panthers, I'm sticking Kenny Robinson out there before I am with Justin Burris. But they paid Burris a lot of money for at least what his worth should be, and I think they're pretty committed to him, even though I don't think he's honestly that great of a player. So if I'm the Panthers, I'm sticking Kenny Robinson out there as soon as possible. Then, they bring in Sean Chandler, another kind of Temple connection, played for the Giants a bit. He's my other unlimited experience practice squad player, him and Keith Kirkwood, just because of the Temple connection. They also recently decided to bring in Brian Cole, who's bounced around already in his young career between the Vikings and Dolphins. So I am going to bring him in here on the practice squad. They also brought in Doug Middleton recently. They're just signing some players. He's a depth player to me. And then I have them cutting Sam Franklin. So if you consider Chin a linebacker, I mean that's okay. But to me, you consider him as a safety, and you play him kind of at linebacker in the box. That's what I think just can't be confused with. Like, if you count Chin as a safety, you feel good in that. But he's honestly going to be more of a in the box type of potentially linebacker type of player, like a Jamal Adams. So that's why you might be lacking in coverage there, even if you line Chin at safety. So that's why, to me, you got to get Kenny Robinson on the field as soon as possible. Their special teams is pretty good. Joey Sly is a solid kicker. Overall, pretty good, middle of the road. I mean, Graham Gano, probably they regret letting go. I mean, with just how good of a season he's had and career with the Giants for the past little bit. Kind of had a career resurgence there. I feel like Joey Sly is still not a bad option, though. I don't love their punting situation. They lose Michael Pilardi to the Dolphins, so Joseph Charlton will have to step in there, so I don't love that. But they are going to have a long snapper competition. Whoa, how about that? long snapper competition. But I'm torn with this because J.J. Jansen has been around here for so long, and he is really, really good as a long snapper. There's a reason, but they might let him go. I absolutely love the story of Thomas Fletcher. If you have not seen it, just go watch the draft call of Matt Rule talking to Thomas Fletcher. He picked this dude, and it was hilarious. He was like, Thomas, are you coming? Thinking, looking at, because if you're a long snapper, you're not expected to be drafted. So you're looking at your undrafted free agent possibilities. So you're saying, I'm still debating whether I'm going to do that. And then Matt Rule's like, no, are you coming or what? I'm picking you right here. And it just was awesome to see that. So clearly they love the kid, and that's awesome. So you could see a changing of the guard there, but it's just so hard because I feel like potentially if they leave Fletcher on the practice squad, somebody else could take him, and I don't want that to happen. I love the connection there with Rule and Fletcher, but I think it's also hard just to let of J.J. Jansen. So the dream for the Panthers is if they can keep Jansen for a season, for one more year, have Fletcher be on the practice squad, and then after a year switch, that'd be ideal. But if needed, you can go with Thomas Fletcher right away. I mean, I'm excited for the kids. So, anyways, let's move on to talking about the schedule. So, if you are new to this series here, I do what's called 50-50 games because I give automatic L's and automatic W's. We have not gotten high enough yet. We're getting close to where I'll start giving some automatic W's to teams. But I'll also give automatic losses. And so, besides that leaves a lot of games, right? So what I do are called 50-50 games. And this is, one of the, when you have this many 50-50 games, like that left side looks pretty interesting with all those colors. And speaking of the colors, how it works is the color goes with the other game that is the same color. So for example, in this case, the Jets and the Texans, I'm saying they'll win one of the two games, 50% of them. And I feel like it's a good way to do this because I started this series, at like the end of May. It's been a few months. Still is kind of almost a whole nother month of this series. So things change. So things are starting to become clear as we get closer. But it's a good way to say, you know what? I think they win one of these two games. Because I've already had to, making this series, do a few adjustments for teams that are up further down the line. So I, do this to make it simpler. So let's just start talking about what it looks like here. I mean, as I mentioned, 8 games to start where you could win them. That is awesome. They could start on fire for them. I mean, that's great. They start with the Jets, who I've already revealed. The Saints are relatively tough this year. They're obviously switching quarterbacks. The Texans are ranked last for me without Deshaun Watson. Cowboys are, NFC East teams are no guarantee to be any good. So I have them, splitting with the Cowboys and the Eagles there. The Vikings, I feel like it'll take a step up, but they're not an elite team necessarily, potentially. The Giants are, another team that I just revealed. So same with the Falcons. Those are both winnable games. The Patriots, I feel like, are actually going to bounce back this year. The Cardinals have a really high upside. As I mentioned, NFC East teams, no guarantee. I've already revealed the Dolphins. The bye week is kind of in an okay spot, a little late there. Falcons, I have them splitting, as mentioned. Bills and Bucks. I feel like I've seen this combo like 10 times where a team will have the Bills and the Bucks within like 3 weeks. I don't know how that happens, but it just does, I guess. But those are two like really, really good teams. And then the Saints, as I mentioned, I have them splitting, and the Bucks are once again a really, really good team. So I have them going 6-11. We've had a solid stretch here of 6-win teams for the last little bit. So I feel like that's a pretty good solid spot for them. Like I said, I just like the culture that Matt Rule brings to this team, and I think Sam Darnold will be a step up over Teddy Bridgewater. So let's give out some awards for this team. I'm starting with Offensive Player of the Year. I'm giving it to Christian McCaffrey. I think he just is an all-around running back, one of the best in the league. I would personally debate him with number 1 or 2 as an all-around running back. Probably 1. Best round of football you could still give to Derrick Henry. So, really, really good. best player on this offense without a doubt. So I had to go with him. Brian Burns, such a good player on defense, underappreciated, absolute stud at edge rusher. So I'm going with him for Defensive Player of the Year. Speed is really good. My breakout, I almost put Sam Darnold. I truly did. I almost did that. But I'm going with Yetur Gross-Matos. I think he takes that starting spot from Morgan Fox opposite Brian Burns, and we have a future pass rush tandem there. So I'm going to go with Yetur Gross-Matos for my breakout player of the year, and I'm going with J.C. Horn. I mean, and you have so many great options for the Panthers rookie of the year. You could go with any of their first three or four picks. I mean, you could go with J.C. Horn, who to me is the clear because he can end up being the best corner on this team almost immediately, and his upside is phenomenal. But you've also got Terrace Marshall, was a great pick. Brady Christensen, great pick. Tommy Tremble, great pick. So you have lots of options there for Rookie of the Year. So thank you so much for watching this video. We're going to keep going, revealing these teams. And with that being said, thank you once again for sticking along this long in the video. And I will see you in the next one.